Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in to this Meet the Programmers edition. We are going to talk through the lineup for the 32nd Annual New Orleans Film Festival, give you some recommendations, and hopefully help you navigate the sea of over 200 films. I think it's close to 200 films, something like that, that we're going to be showing as part of this year's festival. Just as some context and background, the process for selecting these films began 9-10 months ago when we opened up our call for submissions. It was an open call. We used Film Freeway for that, which is an online platform to gather links and information about the films. We received a total of right at 3,000 submissions. And then we, as a team, went through them all and made some decisions about what we wanted to offer a platform for during the festival. We ended up selecting 170 films that are going to be competing in competition at this year's festival. And of those 170 films, women and gender nonconforming directors account for 64% of the lineup. Films helmed by directors of color make up 73% of the lineup. 36% of films came from Black directors. 60% of films represent the American South, and 22% from Louisiana specifically. And 24 nationalities are represented in the 170 films in competition. So that's just a numbers game for you. In putting our programming team together, we relied on 14 total individuals, everybody you see here, plus a few folks who couldn't make this panel, including Greta Hagen-Richardson, Rashada Fortier, Kate Mason, and Carl Harrison Jr. But we are going to be hearing from everyone else on the team with some of the films they're looking forward to the most sharing. So we're going to get to those recommendations in just a little bit. But in addition to the 14 of us, every film is seen by between 1 and probably 4 different volunteer screeners who watch films, share their perspectives. And to talk a little bit more about that, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Zandashé Brown.
Thank you, Clint. So yeah, as Clint was mentioning, our programming style is very conversationally based, and we work with many volunteer screeners. Each programmer works with a small group of screeners to ensure that every film submitted has been watched by at least 3 or 4 eyes before it makes it back to the larger programming group. And so what happens is we'll work with these screeners, we'll watch a group of films, we will score them on a score sheet, and then we'll get together in a meeting and talk about each of the films on that list that were our favorites. These conversations go on for a really long time because everyone has their particular favorites that they want to put out there. And then those that are selected make it to the second round where they're watched by the rest of our programming team. So it's a really incredible way to also build community in the screening process here, but ensure that your film is being watched by many, many eyes and very seriously considered.
Yeah, and like Zandashé was saying, it's definitely not a numbers game. It's not based on just a ranking score of how we assign value to films. It's all rooted in, all of our decisions are rooted in discussions as a team and with multiple people representing all kinds of perspectives and lived experiences. We also rely pretty heavily on a document that we created this year that helps us make some of those decisions. And Kiyoko, if you don't mind talking a little bit about this document, which we call our programming practices, a list of some of the values that we hold in helping guide some of our decision-making processes.
Yeah, and I'm not going to go through all of the programming practices. They are available on our website, but I want to highlight some of the things. This year, in our submission process, this was new. We asked all filmmakers who submitted films to talk about or explain how they've built their production teams with inclusivity in mind, ensuring that there's a plurality of perspectives, and it's our way of trying to build a more diverse creative landscape. We also asked what the filmmakers' connections to the story and the communities that are represented in the film, and that is an attempt to move away from extractive storytelling. So those are 2 things that we required filmmakers to answer, and that those things were considered when we were reviewing films. Some of the other things that we value are innovation. You know, we like to support non-traditional works, filmmakers that are really breaking boundaries. We are looking to move beyond stories of struggle and trauma, particularly those featuring Black and Brown communities. That was definitely something that we took very seriously. And there are other things, but those are some of the highlights from our programming practices that I should also say is a living document, and we are continuing to refine and work on as a team.
Thank you. You mentioned extractive storytelling. Do you want to talk a little bit about what that is?
Sure.
For those who don't know the insider jargon.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think it happens in many ways, but, you know, in particular, being in the South, like, is really important for us to look at how Southern stories are being told and who is making those films. So we look at connections between the filmmaking team and the stories that are being, and this is I should say this is for documentaries and narrative, all films, that we're looking at how the content is created and shaped by the filmmakers and their relationship to the stories that are being told. So we're trying to counter, I would say, an industry that in many ways has had filmmakers come from other parts of the country that have been telling Southern stories. And of course, that's not just limited to Southern stories. You know, of course, we're looking at things like communities of color that we've historically seen that happening a lot, where white filmmakers are coming in and telling the stories of communities of color. So we're really trying to practice what we preach, and look at how those films are being made, and not being extractive in terms of picking stories and telling the stories of communities that they don't have relationships to. Hope that was clear.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you. So we're going to move on to some personal recommendations, and I don't want to call them favorites because we love all the films, but I did ask everyone to choose a couple of films they wanted to highlight and build some support for. And I know that's why you're tuning in, to get some of these recommendations. I'm going to start with you, John Kieran. You program in a variety of different categories and have for several years. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your background and experiences, and then lead into kind of a film or a couple films that you want to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. So like you said, Clint, I work in a couple categories, and I've been doing it for a little bit. I think this makes my 9th festival in programming.
10, but 9 might be right. Yeah,
it goes a little bit further back. I didn't start in programming immediately, but date math. Who's counting? Who's counting? A lot of years under the bridge, if that's what I mean to say. Anyway, so yeah, I work in three categories to be specific. I work with Clint and Zandashé and Kenny in narrative features. I work with Clint, Zandashé, and Steph in narrative shorts, and also very proud to work in experimental shorts as well with Rachel and Zuri. So yeah, I wanted to talk about my recommendation, which is a narrative feature called Conference of the Birds. It is a Southern film. It's produced in the South by a Southern filmmaker working in Florida specifically. Takes place in a town called Pahokee, which is sort of inland from Miami Beach area. It's a big cane producing area of Florida. So it's a narrative feature, and it's inspired heavily by the book, or I guess I should say the epic Persian poem, which the title comes from, Conference of the Birds, which Kevin Contento, the filmmaker, sort of encountered as a college student, and decided to, many years later, work into a film. And the way he went about doing it is not quite standard. He didn't sit down and write a script. What he did was sort of lead a group of young men, mostly kids, I guess, high school kids from Pahokee that he was familiar with, that he worked with before on a short film. He kind of led them through a series of scenes and devised a kind of script with them about, sort of inspired by this poem, The Conference of the Birds. So there's a lot to kind of get your arms around when trying to describe this film, and I won't try to capture it all, but it is, I think, the thread that binds it together is about finding inspiration in literature, and the sort of dual nature of that inspiration in the way that you can sort of, when something really speaks to you in words, you kind of start seeing your life through the lens of those words, and also seeing those words through the lens of your own life. And so yeah, it's a really incredible film, very sort of scrappy in its production, and maybe definitely requires kind of an active viewer. You gotta get into it and work with it, which I always really appreciate seeing in our films. I think it's something that you don't necessarily find in a lot of other places you might be consuming films. If you're out there watching films, streaming films, going to movie theaters, maybe at this point, it's a different kind of experience. And I think I'm always really proud when we as a festival can provide those type of experiences to viewers. So yeah, that's my recommendation. It's a great film. I got to talk to Kevin a little bit in the Q&A, and he had a lot of interesting stuff to say about making and unmaking and remaking this film. And I also wanted to put in a tiny little plug for a narrative shorts block, since I work in that category as well. It's called I See You. That's a great one. Lots of personal filmmaking. I hope I didn't steal anybody's recommendation. I don't know what you guys are recommending, so I won't say too much about it, but if anybody else likes it, I like it too. We both like it. So it's great. Y'all should watch it.
Thank you, John. I also want to mention, I'm glad you chose Converse of the Birds, because the director, Kevin Contento, is an alum of the festival. We showed a short film of his, I think it was 2 years ago, might have been 3 years ago, called Hierophany. That's just such a beautiful film, and I think is very much in conversation with the feature. It almost feels like something of a rehearsal for Conference of the Birds in a lot of ways. But great filmmaker, doing incredible things out of Miami area, and yeah, great recommendations, John. Also, speaking of plugs, do you want to talk about what you're doing outside of NOFF? Aren't you?
Oh, really?
Theater?
Oh, well, I'm coming at you from Salem, Massachusetts, Halloween capital, where the streets are full of crispy leaves and crispier tourists. Where I'm helping to get a small 3-screen theater back on its feet. It closed amid the pandemic, and so we're facing all of the excitement and all of the challenges of doing that work at this time. And I should say that my experience at NOFF has given me very many tools to bring into a completely different environment, and it's been a real thrill ride. It's been about 5 months. I feel like I'm kind of at the end of the yo-yo, kind of whipping up and down with everything that's happening in our country and in the industry. But it is a real adventure for sure. Thank you for asking, Clint.
Yeah, well, we hate to not have you in New Orleans with us anymore, but it's Salem's gain, and we've been excited to track things with the theater. Well, moving on, Zuri Obi, you're next on my screen, so why don't we go with you? You want to talk a little bit about your background, experiences, and films you want to talk about?
Yes, there's always like a technical little blender, right? Hey y'all, I'm Zuri. I'm a cinematographer, experimental filmmaker. I've had the pleasure and the honor of screening my experimental films at New Orleans Film Festival, so it's really great to be on the other side of it and to see like all of these beautiful, inspiring films that I had the honor of screening. But the two that really stuck out to me, the first one is She Gathered Me by Miyata Kawinzi. I hope I say her name right, but I had the honor of speaking with her about her film, which is like a meditative piece. Miyata is Southern-born, New York-based filmmaker. And in her film, she uses breath and text to mend the gaps between memory and migration. And the way she executes it is really beautiful with her singing and the rhythm. So it's something that you definitely melt into and go into a space that's like, it feels ethereal and full of promise. Whereas, gaps are usually seen as void, so she really did a great job of executing that. And my second one is Fireflies by Leo Bittencourt. He's a Brazilian-based filmmaker who presents a soft, sensual, and tender underbelly of Rio de Janeiro's nocturnal landscape. The film is not safe for work, but I think it's masterfully shot and designed. Visually and sonically stunning film, absolutely. I've seen it probably 10 times. Experience it with headphones, experience it with surround sound. It's definitely a film that transports you into this space that's familiar but otherworldly. And it's just, I'm a cinematographer myself, so I'm like looking up his IMDb and trying to link up with him because this is so beautiful, so tender and sensual, and not heavy-handed in its execution. So those are the two films that I feel like I wake up in the morning thinking about. So I hope you find some kind of inspiration in that experience, in those two films. So yeah.
Thank you, Zuri. And both of those are playing in different experimental shorts blocks. So look those up for sure. And She Gathered Me, if I'm not mistaken, that is lifted from a Toni Morrison novel, right? Isn't that line
Yes,
from?
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I definitely had a connection with that because one of my first film with New Orleans Film Festival was based on a Toni Morrison passage. So she is just like the matriarch and mother of inspiration. So yeah, I definitely immediately connected with this film and its through line. So yeah, rest in peace, Mama Morrison.
Well, I'm going to segue to Rachel and Weaver because I think Fireflies was also one that you had potentially talked about wanting to mention, Rachel. So maybe you can add anything else about your love for that one. It's definitely getting a lot of love from our programming team, and anything else you want to talk about. Also, would love to for you to share a little bit about your background as well.
Thank you so much, Clint, and thanks everyone. I'm a big fan of Fireflies as well, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But kind of to give you some of my background, I'm a filmmaker, a video artist, and an installation artist. I primarily work in experimental formats, and in years when we are able to do entirely in-person stuff, I run the Cinema Reset program. But this year, I've focused entirely on work that can be streamed or viewed in an outdoor theatrical context. So what I'll add to what Zuri has already said so wonderfully about Fireflies is that it sort of begins with this sci-fi atmosphere and kind of slowly builds this striking sensory experience, which is set between like civic architecture and tropical plants and the human dynamics and ecologies of struggle and pleasure. And it's just such a really interesting and rich and lush project. So that's my plug for Fireflies. And then the other film I wanted to highlight is one called Busted Open. It's in one of the experimental shorts blocks, specifically the Cinema Reset block. And it is by Danielle Deadweiler. It's an intergenerational portrait of Southern Black womanhood and motherhood. And it kind of looks at the blurry space between domestic and gendered private labor. So the work of loving and caregiving and dreaming, along with like everyday jobs and complex realities faced by the four women who are kind of at the center of the project. And so the work features this really lyrical pacing and surreal imagery that transforms our experience of it overall and asks us to contend with gender and racial confines of Southern Black women's identity. And it's a really memorable piece. So I highly recommend you check it out.
And I just want to mention Danielle Deadweiler. Some of you might recognize her name because she won the jury award last year at the New Orleans Film Festival for a film called Chores that we showed. Another experimental short.
Chores
was amazing.
Love Chores.
It's so good. And this is just like an expansion of that same sort of energy that sort of centers Southern Black womanhood. So everybody needs to watch it.
Yeah, I think Danielle's based in Atlanta, if I'm not mistaken.
That's
and
correct.
She's also, has an acting career outside of her, directing career as well. That's super successful, but really exciting to see her back at the festival again with new work. Okay, let's see. Amber Love, you program in multiple categories: doc features, doc shorts, animated shorts. Where do you want to take us with your recommendations?
Oh boy. I think I was going to go into shorts. So I've been with the festival since 2016. Wow.
Indeed.
Every time I say the year, I take a moment. Yes, 2016. And then I work as a filmmaker and a documentary editor, and obviously I'm here, so a programmer. And I'm going to take us into some shorts that I really like. The first one that I'll talk about is called The Door of Return. It's a really beautiful documentary short. It is about the Afro-German diaspora, and it features interviews with different activists and kind of talking about the struggle of racism and social justice in Germany, but it is contextualized within a kind of two Black women who are living in the future where racism has been left behind, capitalism has been solved and left behind, and really kind of a utopian future. And looking back at the present, as one of the young women is about to return to Germany in 2020 to kind of go through her trials in the year. And what was really wonderful to me about this film, as Kiyoko has mentioned, we talk a lot about kind of moving beyond stories of trauma. And this is one that very much highlights the realities of being Black and German, but it does so from the vantage point of a possible future where we have solved the problem, or we are allowed to be kind of free and Black, and the struggle has been won, which is really empowering. It's a really wonderful way to talk about these kinds of issues without it being a kind of oppressive feeling to even watch, thinking about a future where this is no longer the case. So it's a really beautiful film. The visuals are beautiful. Please go check that out. It's in the documentary shorts block. And then the second, yes.
Can I interrupt you? It's in a documentary shorts block. Everything that you're saying about it doesn't all sound documentary. Do you want to talk a little bit about like that aspect of it?
It is a hybrid film, which is a really interesting way to approach documentary. And so parts of it are narrative. Obviously, the futuristic parts are narrative and shot really well and lusciously. And so it is kind of the narrative wrapper that allows us into these actual interviews that are documentary based and based in very much things that have happened and are happening in Germany within the Black diaspora there. So yes, hybrid films, so cool. Check it out. I wish people would do more. So there's that. And then every year, my favorite thing is also the animated shorts block. Just the entire block. I love animated shorts. They're great. And this year in particular, we have a really wide array of different approaches and styles and textures. But everyone in this block is also engaging with very deep and personal and at times existential questions about being a person in society and our individual experiences. And I think on the whole, this animated shorts block this year in particular is asking some really big questions and really engaging people into some very intimate feelings and emotions and experiences. So check them out. They're always my favorite, but this year they're pretty good.
Thank you, Amber. I think I'm going to transition to Amada because you programmed in both animated shorts and also Door of Return with Doc Features category, Doc Shorts category. But do you want to talk a little bit about your background experience and some of the recommendations that you have for viewers?
Yeah, definitely. Hi, everyone. Really happy to be here with all of you. I'm a producer, I'm a cinematographer, and I'm also a programmer. Currently, I work, I'm both based in the United States and also in El Salvador, which is where I'm from. And yeah, I really wanted to talk about, I also wanted to give a huge shout out to New Orleans Film Festival because it's a place that has, like Zuri was saying, has made space for my work and has been a huge supporter from the very beginning. The first film I ever shot was presented at New Orleans, and so it's really wild to be on the other side and to be programming. And this year it was so hard to program because there was so much good stuff. And so really, really happy with the lineup. It's pretty amazing. So yeah, I think I wanted to talk about the program where we will see On the Divide, which is a feature documentary directed by Maya Cueva and Leah Gallant. And it looks at abortion access on the Texaco-Mexico border, on the Texas-Mexico border, sorry. And the feature is preceded by a short film called Disrupted Borders by Alejandra Aragon. Really excited about this program because it's really important to just, have stories like these, stories that dismantle the typical border narratives in the media landscape and that are really, really harmful. And so they stay away from that lens of looking at the world. I'm very much for looking at a world where borders are dismantled. And first of all, I like how in Disrupted Borders, it's about a girl scientist and it focuses on her friendship. And I think that that's something really special. I had the opportunity to watch the team for Disrupted Borders pitch at the New Orleans Film Festival in 2019. So it was really exciting to get to see that they're going to share the finished product this year. And it's just really a wonderful, wonderful story. And with On the Divide, makers look beyond what you expect about a border town, look at different nuances, how different people make up a place that is located on a border. But then also they talk about an issue that if you go beyond south of the border, you got in Latin America alone, you got the Dominican Republic, Nicaragua, Honduras, and El Salvador, where abortion is completely banned. So having the courage to tackle such an urgent but also difficult subject, I just found their voices to be incredibly courageous in this film. And I just think that it's so important to look how issues go, beyond the limitations of geography that have been set. And then I also want to shout out Hidden Portals. Amber was talking about the Door of Return, and the Door of Return is a part of Hidden Portals. And I think it's such a special shorts block. It has a lot of really amazing films in it, really unique. So, yeah.
Thank you, Amada, and thank you for shouting out that block. I love Hidden Portals. I think a lot of us in the Doc Shorts team who were responsible for putting that together are really in love with that block and all the films in it. So can't endorse that enough. Stephanie Tell, who helped with narrative shorts this year and is also part of our marketing team for the festival. So doing double duty there. But talk a little bit about your background and also some recommendations you have.
Hi, I'm programmed in the narrative shorts category this year. My background's in mostly academia and popular journalistic writing for music primarily and film as well. I'm currently a PhD candidate at the University of Melbourne in Australia. So I wanted to recommend one shorts block and one feature. So shorts block is one of our narrative shorts blocks, Otherworldly. And these are 4 great films from the US, Spain, Cuba, and Brazil. Shea, Wolf Totem, Manaka, Inheritance, and The Rodeo. I don't really want to talk about any one in particular. I have a really big soft spot for all of these films. And I think this is just such a great plot. It's such a good mix of magic realism and horror. There's ghostly horror and earthly and creaturely and man-made horrors. Just great mix of genres, but they're also very thoughtful and artful, all very different, really engaging, with beautiful, striking visual languages. So definitely recommend narrative shorts block Otherworldly. And the feature I want to talk about, I have not seen, but I'm really excited for. It's a spotlight film called Memoria. It's only going to be available in person. So if you're in the city, really recommend that you join us for that. The latest film from acclaimed Thai filmmaker Apichatpong Weerasethakul about a Scottish woman played by Tilda Swinton, who the description is, after hearing a loud bang at daybreak, begins experiencing a mysterious sensory syndrome while traversing the jungles of Colombia. So far, it's already won the Grand Jury Prize at Cannes. It's an extremely international production that has been just super well reviewed, described as cinematic and lyrical, which is, if you're familiar with this filmmaker's films, is not really a surprise. So I'm really excited for it. And as far as I know, this film will not be available to be streamed ever. So I really suggest seeing it in person if you get the chance. Yeah, and that's my recommendation.
Great recommendation.
Actually, I didn't realize this was happening until just now, and that is super special. Like this film is, I think what they're doing with the release strategy is they're playing it like one engagement at a time forever. Like it's not like a rollout where it's like, we'll have it in 2 cities and then 40 cities and then 120 cities. It's like, this is it. Like this is, if you're in New Orleans, this is your chance. And that's incredible. That's mind blowing.
Very excited about that one. Also, I think it works really well with your otherworldly narrative shorts suggestion. I think if we could extend that block to include a feature, I think it would work really well within that space. But love the otherworldly program as well. I mean, it's really special when films can kind of coalesce like that around a certain theme and just feel like they belong together in a shorts block. And I think those 4 films absolutely do. And such a beautiful program. Okay, Kenny Reynolds. Tell us a little bit about your background and your recommendations for the festival.
So I'm a producer in the indie film space. I was blessed to come through the Southern Producers Lab some years ago. I don't know how long. I'm afraid to say how long. Just go off the grades and count that. But yeah, this is my first year getting to work in the narrative features, and it's been a great education and also a wonderful opportunity to work alongside so many people who have given my career a jump start and have showcased some of my work in the past. So thanks. But I want to recommend this movie called I'm Fine, Thanks for Asking. It is by 2 directors, Kelly Colley and Angelique Molina. Kelly Colley also stars in the film. It is about a widower and mother who basically the story picks up as a day in the life of a widower and a mother who's currently experiencing homelessness, and she's on the verge of getting just that bit that she needs to secure housing for her and her daughter, which sounds super depressing, but this movie really comes at it from a very the tone is very light and I almost want to say fluffy and not really, but like it's told in a way that reminds me of films when I was growing up, Black films, 90s films. It's easy to drop a Friday in the Wood in there, but basically like these films that center themselves on a topic that really should have some seriousness to it, and it is, but really uses the comedy as a tool to gain the audience's empathy for these characters, and I think this film really does that well. Also, if you're a fan of just like the indie filmmaking spirit, this film is for you. Legend has it that these ladies basically took their pandemic check and flipped this opportunity into making this film, which seems so much bigger than what this small film calls for. So if you're a fan of people really taking constrained means to tell something so great and big, this is your story.
And confirm they made this over the pandemic. Shoestring looks great.
It's also really fun. And one of the directors, Kelly Callie, is the star. She's the lead actor and is incredible. I think she has such great screen presence, and we'll probably be seeing a lot of her in the years to come. I also want to mention that the other co-director, Angelique Molina, is also an alum of the festival. She had it was like a 40-minute short film, like a mid-length film called There Goes the Neighborhood, about gentrification within a community outside of Los Angeles that was a really beautiful short. And if I'm not mistaken, her family has really strong Louisiana roots. In the film, which is partly based on her family, they're celebrating Mardi Gras and they watch Saints games, and they're very much still tied to New Orleans. And it's always fun to see the New Orleans diaspora out there kind of reconnecting with the city. Okay, I'm gonna circle back to you, Zandashé, with some recommendations. So go for it and talk a little bit about your background as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like a couple of other people have mentioned, New Orleans Film Festival, New Orleans Film Society was a really big part of my start as well as a filmmaker. I was in the Emerging Voices program many years ago, maybe in its second or third iteration, pitching a project, and I've been back in the years since in South Pitch or sharing my own work. But yeah, I'm a writer director, born and raised in Louisiana, and now have the honor of being the artist engagement and programming manager for the New Orleans Film Society. And feeding back into the filmmaking community here. So it's been a really incredible journey, and it's great to see these films every year, to see what's coming out of the South, to see what's coming out of the world at large. We get a lot of really incredible submissions, and so there's always much more that we want to talk about whenever we do these Meet the Programmer sessions, which is why we say go see as much as you can. But the one that I wanted to talk about today was it's a feature film. We're showing a really endearing feature film called Islands. It's directed by Martin Edverlin, and it's about a Filipino immigrant. He's a single man who's getting up there in age, and he's trying to find his person. His mother passes away suddenly, and he suddenly has to become a caretaker to his father, which he's able to do with the help of a cousin that flies in from abroad and brings with her this warmth and energy and this newness to life that he hasn't had before. And so some interesting sparks fly between them, and it brings up some really complicated questions about who you can love and how you can love them. But there's also what I'm also really interested in about this film is, conversations about Filipino caregivers are so prevalent in the media, and the abuse that they endure. And it's really special to see this film acknowledge that caregiving role and the complexity of it within the community from such a compassionate place. And it's just, it's a nourishing watch. All of the characters feel so lived in. And I had the honor of doing a panel with the director, and you should check that out as well. He talks about how, how most of them are non-actors and just how beautifully that came together. So it's an incredible watch that has really stuck with me since we watched it to be considered, and I'm excited to share it with everyone.
Definitely another staff favorite. I think, Kenny, you might have had that on your short list for recommendations as well. Is that right? I think we all really
Oh yeah, I'm a big fan of that one. That one, it's that tugs at all the right heartstrings for me.
Yeah, I loved it as well. It's the sort of film where you look at the subject and you're like bracing for something really dour, and it does pull you through some pretty tough material, but in the end it's so like you said, nourishing, I think is the word for it. It's life affirming. It's a hopeful movie despite all that. I loved it.
Totally.
And I'm gonna watch that Q&A. I'm excited.
Well, is that that's a panel, right? Zandashé, is that the chemistry on screen panel? Is that right?
Yes, it's a panel. It's called Love on Screen. So he's joined by filmmaker from the short film Cousins, as well, which there's a lot of really interesting similarities that I don't know, for those of you who have seen Cousins in this group right now, I want you to
Cousins
as well to see just, in terms of where the two filmmakers are coming from, the relationships being portrayed on screen, and even just, the motivation to make those films. So please go check that out. It's such a great conversation.
Well, thank you so much for those recs. Moving on to Kiyoko Mcrae. Talk a little bit about your background, also what you do for the organization, and your recommendations.
Sure. I'm Kyoko Mcrae. I'm the director of documentary programming and filmmaker labs, and I'm also a filmmaker. And like Zandashé and Zuri and a lot of folks here, I've been supported by the Film Society in the past too, and so yeah, that's kind of how I got my start. And I'm also a theater director, so I kind of transitioned from theater into film, and have really felt supported in growing as a filmmaker. And yeah, I wanted to also highlight the filmmaker lab. Some people mentioned Emerging Voices, Zandashé and Zuri, part of that program, and Kenny mentioned Southern Producers Lab. So I couldn't decide on film, so I thought, my title kind of merges those two things. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the films by our alum from those programs. So one that I wanted to mention was The Neutral Ground by C.J. Hunt, who explores the ideology of the lost cause of the Confederacy, and through the movement to remove Confederate monuments goes around the country. And it is scathingly funny and painfully relevant. I couldn't believe how funny it was to me. Like, just it's such an entertaining but also really poignant ride. And I appreciate how CJ also acknowledges the amazing organizing work that's happened here in New Orleans, but specifically with Take 'Em Down NOLA, that has really helped to spark this nationwide and really worldwide movement. So definitely check that out. And, there's just so many filmmakers that worked on this, produced by Darcy McKinnon and shot by Paavo Hänninen. Jeremy Blum also produced, and there's just so many great filmmakers. Jane Geisler edited.
Katie Pham, shout out Katie Pham.
Yes. The list goes on. And so it's going to really be a great, I think, celebration of a local filmmaking community. Gosh, there's so many, but another one, and somebody mentioned Disrupted Borders earlier. I think it was Amada. I want to just mention Ramon Villa Hernandez, who was in Southern Producers Lab. We have The Laughing Man by Zach Godshaw and produced by Jillian Godshaw, who was in the Southern Producers Lab. They're local filmmakers. So I want to shout out to them. I got to mention Many Fires This Time, which Jason Foster is an alum of Emerging Voices and also happens to be my husband. So excited about that, and a lot of other incredible artists, local artists involved in that film. We have Stay Prayed Up, that was, I think, also produced by Charlotte Ammons, who's part of Southern Producers Lab. I'm sure there are more, but those are some of the highlights of the documentary programmings that feature our alums from our filmmaker programs. So,
just adding on to that, Vashni Karen's You Can't Stop Spirit is a doc short that's just incredible about baby doll culture in New Orleans, and is playing as part of a block that was actually curated by Third Horizon, which is nonprofit based out of Miami that's just doing incredible work, and we have such respect for. And they curated a really great block of films that speak to masking and kind of processional culture throughout the world, and it's going to be presented in partnership with Prospect New Orleans. So that's a really great block of shorts to check out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's so many
Borders
more.
came through South Pitch, another wonderful.
Yes.
Program.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I also just wanted to shout out to Amada and Amber and Clint, and just how much fun it was to work with you guys. And one of the things that I really loved this year was coming up with these blocks, these doc short programs. And you know, I kind of wanted to just let folks know that I think it's an interesting, a little insight into our process, you know, where we're not necessarily thinking about programs in the beginning, you know, but just sort of selecting the most compelling work. But towards the end, we start to think about how films could fit together and sort of create new meaning and how we program them together in these blocks. So I really enjoyed that process. And, you know, Hidden Portals was one that was mentioned earlier that feels particularly unique. And I really love Southern Land and Water, which is really looking at the American South in its complexities and how people have been nurtured and attracted to the land, but also exploited. And so really looking at the complexities of the landscape and what that means for different communities. Beautifully Me has some really great shorts in there that, you know, really explore how people accept their true self and how it can really take a whole journey to kind of come to understand who you are. And so there's just such a spectrum of experiences in there that are really beautiful and personal and intimate. And I could go on and on, but yeah, Black Love, Black Joy is a great shorts program. Again, going back to what we were saying earlier about looking for stories that go beyond struggle and trauma. Okay, I'm gonna stop.
Just mention them all. Mention them all because we love them all. It's true. I also appreciate you just calling out that camaraderie that, you know, was felt within the doc shorts and doc feature space. I mean, it's the same in all of them. You know, experimental shorts, y'all's team. I mean, and in narrative shorts, I feel like that category in particular, because it starts with such a huge number of films that we have to pare down, it means that those fights are all the more intense. And you know,
a lot of tears, a lot of hard words, you know.
I kid you not, we're talking like 5-hour long discussions at a time, and it is the films are in this festival because they were really championed by members of this team, and there was such passion behind our belief in the films, and we're just really excited to be showing the films that we are. I also, I mean, on that same token, on the other side of that token, I also want to thank all the films that did submit that we're not showing. We're you know, really blessed and honored to consider so many films each year. And there's so many films that we could talk about and would love for you to see that we're not showing. And it's just, you know, one of the unfortunate, you know, realities of this process is that we simply don't have the capacity to show them all and talk about like a Zoom call like this where we're trying to provide recommendations for a slate of 1,000, which is what it very well could be. And I mean, saying that, it makes me want to call everyone's attention to the keynotes that we're going to be sharing this year. We have two, one from Leo Herrera, who is a New Orleans-based queer activist, who is talking about his own journey as a filmmaker and an activist. And then we have another keynote from Sonia Childress. And Sonia is someone who has been involved with the festival in all kinds of ways over the past, I would say, decade, as a panelist and a juror and a speaker and a mentor. And she is such a something of a guiding light, particularly within the nonfiction space. But that's something that she said. I actually borrowed that from her around congratulating all those who submitted, whose work we're not showing, because there is, it's a real feat even to, you know, create a film and share it out in the world, to be judged and to be, you know, I just want to thank everyone who shared their work with us this year.
And I just want to say, please know that each of us get our hearts broken by at least one or two films at the end.
More than one or two, Zandashé, who are you kidding?
I mean, I think per person, you know, where it gets really quiet at the ends of these meetings, and you know, we start using shorter sentences with one another until we come back the next day, and it's all good. But please know that there are definitely some films that we're not showing that we adored.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. And I'm so sorry that some of our colleagues couldn't be with us to share their own recommendations. It's busy times these days, and this is not everyone's full-time job. And I so appreciate you showing up and sharing your love for these films with our audiences. And special thanks to Rashada and Kate and Greta and Carl, who couldn't be part of this, but they were such important members of our team as well. Any other final thoughts before we send people off to the lineup to make their decisions, get their tickets, show up to the movies? Any closing thoughts from anybody?
I know, is it worth mentioning, just to reiterate, that we are doing in-person screenings of all the films, because I think a lot of people think it might just be virtual. So we are excited to celebrate with you all in person with your COVID vaccine, proof of vaccine, or your negative test in hand. Yeah, really looking forward to celebrating as a community, not just a filmmaking community, but yeah, very excited.
And things are going to be a little different this year, whether you're with us in person or not. And so I just encourage you, if there's something that you see that really strikes a chord with you, to reach out and pay that filmmaker a compliment, because we could all use it. And just the dynamic of, being in conversation with people around the work we make has changed so greatly. So I think people will be really appreciative of it.
All right. With that said, Steph, Kenny, Rachel, John, Zuri, Zandashé, Kiyoko, Amber, Amada, thank you all so much for your work, for your recommendations, and thanks everybody for tuning in and making an effort to explore the lineup a little deeper. Enjoy your festival selections, enjoy the New Orleans Film Festival, and we'll see you at the movies. Bye-bye.